Funhouse active, king of the palace, rubber like Malcolm, ball up fist in the air to the flashlight. Thank you for joining another episode of Coffee Community Culture Dialogue Podcast. And joining me today is a woman who has done a lot for her community in Tallahassee. She taught at Florida A&M University, among other universities. She's now the senior editor at Jazz Time Magazine and owner of Beach Shore Jazz Venue in Tallahassee, in the historic Frenchtown neighborhood. Please welcome Dr. Gerri Seay. Thank you for joining me, Dr. Gerri.
Thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely. I always wanted to have you on to talk about this topic that's near and dear to me. And I'm talking about jazz. As a jazz enthusiast, I used to play jazz when I was a little kid. Why did I stop? Why did I put the horn down? I do not know, but I regret it. I regret not continue playing music, but I have various types of artists that I listen to. So just being an enthusiast and supporting the arts, the genre that means so much in our history, especially as Black people, is something that I will continue to do. And so, but I'm happy to have you on to discuss the evolution of jazz, because you've been a huge part of the genre and the culture as well. So first and foremost, congratulations on the new role as senior editor at Jazz Time Magazine. Can you tell a little bit how that came about?
Okay, sure. Yeah, it happened when some friends of ours actually purchased the magazine. The whole conglomerate, quite a few different publications under the one corporate entity. But as they began that new venture, they had to make some really quick responses. And a part of that was arranging the editorial parts of the magazine and getting their various journal entries lined up. So in the midst of trying to pull that together, they called to ask if I would help out with that. And I said, sure, that'd be great. So that's how that happened. And not without an adventure, but yeah, that's how that happened. They needed someone to step right in and be able to hit the ground running.
And so how long has Jazz Times Magazine been in existence, been in publications?
I think it was started in the 70s. I'm not quite sure exactly when it could have been later, but it's been, at least a decade or so.
Yeah. Okay. And so what is your, as a senior editor, basically your duties and your responsibilities at Jazz?
Well, they wanted to change the coverage of the magazine. Heretofore, it had relied on various writers to put together various articles about musicians and etc. And they wanted to kind of shift that focus to the actual musicians themselves and other artists, so that they themselves could create the content about them and who they were and how they got where they were and this and that, as opposed to a third party coming and interpreting that for the magazine. So when you read it now, you'll find that the artists themselves are entering the various perspectives of how they got there, their experiences. They share their photographs and other more personal kinds of articles. And so on top of that, what I wanted to contribute had to do with where are the musicians coming from.
Okay.
In other words, I mean, everybody doesn't just end up in New York. They're coming from other places. And where are these other places that are actually stimulating the responses to jazz. And we wanted to look at those local clubs where folks really
Hmm.
practice their art before they really blow up. They're playing other places. And where are those other places? And what are some of the things that they've found to be true in their experience with making sure that jazz has a place to exist in the community? How does the community respond to the musicians that are created in their um, web of contacts? And so one of the, I think it was this month, or it could have been month of May, we featured on the cover all of these various clubs around the country. And you just see the front of the building and maybe a sign that has the name on it. And then we're going to go back and revisit those clubs and get some of the owners' perspectives and some of the supporters' ideas, because at the end of the day, these musicians are being they're self grooming, really. They're
Yeah,
getting
yeah,
all the, yeah, they're getting all of their skill sets in these local environments, and
that's right.
then they get up to New York or California or wherever. So we wanted to just take a look and see where the incubators were for music, for jazz.
And yeah, and that's great because that's how you, uh, unlike the jazz, the generation of jazz, people go from their small towns, maybe from the South, and then go strictly directly to New York, and some make it, some really don't. And but you can sort of like uh, lick your chops in the smaller
Exactly.
cities, the smaller venues, and create a following, create
Yep.
you know a fan base,
Exactly.
for true jazz enthusiasts. And so that's awesome that you guys do that. Can you tell me some of the area, like maybe some of the cities that you even musicians that you've targeted so far in your position at Jazz Times?
Well, we have a couple of things that that they'd like to do, and one is that the musicians would talk about some experience they had, and some of those kinds of things that only happen to musicians.
Hmm.
That's called, and they talk about that in 250 words or less. And then there's another feature that shares some of their photographs just in the course of a day. I mean, they some of those folks still go to the laundromat. I mean, let's just talk about what are you doing when you're not playing? And so they have some photographs of that. So we looked at. I know Billy Harper was early on, and he shared some great photos of himself and his family, and a day with Billy Harper. It was kind of cool. And then we had a gentleman from, he's living in Austria,
Hmm.
and he shared his family and his day and what's life like over there, and that was kind of fun. And we had a couple of women to bring in local environments, and one in DC and one in Richmond, Virginia. So we're just trying to get that coverage. We have a
Yeah.
couple of folks who are Texas coming on board shortly and that kind of thing. So it's been fun. Now, some of those clubs, I mean, they're clubs. And what I did was reach out to the folks that I already knew and ask them, what's a club in your area? And they sent me the names of these clubs that they go to, like in Chicago and Detroit and a couple of places in Arizona. Renee Marie gave me a list of some folks that she really enjoyed. We put that in there. So, a lot of these musicians travel
Right.
because they've already gained a certain amount of fame, as is has Renee
Hmm.
Marie and Scotty Barnhart with the Count Basie Orchestra. So they're able to click off the names of these places where they've been that they enjoy
Right.
so
Yeah.
much, and so we tried to include those as well. So it was fun. People enjoyed, and they enjoyed naming the places that they've been, and
Yeah.
how, and apparently they're memorable because they're able to just rip it right off. Yeah.
So let's start back into to your love and your introduction to jazz. When was that for you? And what did it feel like to you when you first heard
Well, so I'm the baby in my family. So
it?
when my brothers left to go on their way, one to college, one to the Navy, they left their records behind. So that's all I knew. I was listening to what they were listening to. This was before the transistor radio. So that puts it back. That kind of dates me, but that's what I was listening to: Cal Jader and Lambert, Hendricks, and Ross. And I mean, that's all was in the house, and so they listened, and that's what I played when they left. Um, so it's always been kind of the base for me in terms of music. It's those are the things that resonate with me. So moving up a couple of decades. Um, I met my husband actually in a jazz club, and when
wow.
he came over to the house for something because he's from DC and I'm from Richmond, and he was in Richmond. So one of the times that he came back to play in Richmond, he came over the house, and I think we were just looking at, I don't even know what it was, but they had a list of all these songs. Well, there were all these jazz songs, and so he just started asking me, "How's that go?" And so I started singing a song, and he said, "Well, what about that one?" He's like, "Wait, what?" He said, "How do you know all these songs?" And I told him, I said, "Well, that's what I grew up with. I mean, I have a lot of other records and stuff, but I mean, back in the day, and the day being the 50s,
Right.
that's all that was on the radio, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And again, there weren't any transistor radios, and then
Mm-hmm.
records, that's what you bought. So I think he liked that I knew the songs because I don't I don't know it just has to be a part of your environment, I guess. So that's how I got started listening to music. And then when we got married, of course, I had an opportunity to travel with him, which was really cool. And so, then people are over the house, everybody's practicing, there's somebody's rehearsing, da 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 da. So it was fun. Yeah,
So it's sort of been in well, when you met your husband, so it's sort of like you've been around it almost all your whole life.
pretty much, exactly. And
And so
when you're married to a musician, uh, if you're not into that, that would probably be a difficult situation. But
yeah, because that's his livelihood.
yeah, right. And there's a lot to it. I mean, a lot. One of the things I learned was about being on time. A couple of times he left me altogether. Well, you got a car, you'll get there because I was making him late, and that is not.
For his gigs. Yeah,
Yeah,
his time is money.
that ain't gonna work. So I learned that lesson really early. Yeah.
So have you guys traveled? I mean, did you hit the circuit with your
I
husband?
Yeah, I got a chance to travel with him when he was playing with Helen Merrill, and that was in
Mm-hmm.
Japan. That was way cool. That was where I really understood how people appreciate jazz because in that was at a Blue Note. When they came out to play, everybody in the audience stood up and clapped. And they hadn't
Wow.
played a note. And when they left the stage, they stood up again. And they didn't talk. And they weren't allowed to take pictures in the Blue Note out there.
Wow. Really?
No. Mm-mm.
Why not?
They don't do that. They don't take them. I guess I don't know, the flash or video. You can't do that. But that's been a minute now. That's a long
Yeah.
while ago. In terms of time. But I was just struck with how much respect they got.
Mm-hmm.
And
And
yeah,
so,
we went other
yeah.
places, but that was fun. We went to Athens. That was with Wallace Roney.
Yeah.
And, we were just walking around looking for a restaurant, and then we went to the club to look around, and then we were walking back to the hotel. And by that time, it had gotten dark. And I mean, I just all of a sudden, I just looked up for some reason, and I'll be damned if that wasn't the Parthenon. I was like, oh my God, wait a minute. It was like, I had to actually, I was like, wait, we got to wait. Hold on, let me just look at this right quick. Because it was just so bizarre that we had been there. It just was illuminated. The whole mountain was illuminated. It was amazing. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the other thing I like about these other countries really are into mass transit.
Yeah.
They have the most beautiful trains and streetcars.
Right.
I mean, everything's on, like the trains are on time. They're spotless. They're brand new. They have a first class in the train. So, I mean, when you get to see how other people are living and how other countries treat their people, it's really eye-opening to see how other countries are more interested in making sure their people are well off and are reaping the benefits of being in that country. It's amazing.
Totally different from here in the States. I mean, because every documentary, jazz book that I've read, everyone has shared the same sentiments. Like, it's just the treatment is so different in other countries.
Yeah, much, much different. But I don't think that that's any different than, in this country, there is no real, I don't know, there's no place for that kind of admiration of people. There's a certain kind of almost disdain for people who are really talented and have all these extraordinary gifts. It's like, so what, but in other countries, it's really treasured.
Yeah. So, and how important would jazz music back in? Well, first of all, let me ask you this: when you were traveling with your husband to these different countries, what time was that in? Were they doing the 60s, the 70s?
No, no, it would have been 80, late 80s and the 90s.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, talk about the importance of jazz back in those days versus today.
Back in those days. Okay. I think that there were more places for folks to play. We lived in Richmond for a good while, and there were several different clubs then in Richmond, Virginia, so that people could always work.
Right.
And it didn't cost that much to get into. These are local clubs.
Right.
But it gave an opportunity for the local musicians to have somewhere to play. Because we're not talking about people who are playing in New York or anything. This is just what was going on locally.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there were way more opportunities for folks to play. And for the most part, certain clubs had certain kinds of behaviors that were expected. So if you wanted to talk and whatnot, you could go over to this club and that would be okay. And the guys be playing no problem. But if you were going over here, then you had to be quiet. Everybody kind of knew what was what. And then there were jam sessions and different ones. It was always it was a busy time, really busy. Mm-hmm. But here now, lately, it's not sustainable.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not sustainable because we're talking about like when gas was 50 cents.
Right.
So, now everything's about the money for the most part.
Yeah. And
it's more expensive. I mean, only naturally. I mean, people would work, there's always that $100 gig or that $50 gig, and you kind of know that. And that hasn't really changed, actually. Mm-hmm. That's still about the same amount of money people get who are local, if they're lucky.
And so basically that is the struggle or the challenges for local jazz clubs today versus back then.
Exactly. Okay. And a lot of those clubs were in, like, let's say they were in hotels, or they were restaurants. Like one side might be the restaurant, and the other side would be the club kind of thing. Right. So they always had some kind of income past the music.
Yeah.
But now, I mean, like if you wanted to get a restaurant license, you got to have 2,500 square feet, and you have to, and if you want a liquor license, then you got to have more food sold than you do, So there are so many different kinds of regulations that maybe they didn't have back then. I'm not quite sure, but I figure if it's in a hotel, then of course they have their own setup and their own set of rules. But here, like in this little town, I mean, you could probably get a lot of people in the football crowd to fill 2,500 square feet. That's a lot of square footage. And then you could probably get that liquor license because you have more capacity. Mm-hmm. But for small clubs, that's a different vibe. You don't have that kind of square footage. At the same time, go ahead.
No, I was going to ask you, do you think just a regular, I know in some bigger cities, especially like in Atlanta, there's a couple, jazz clubs. But do you think that jazz club can hold a club, an actual jazz club, can hold its own and have sustainability uh, in our community?
If it's small enough, I think the
Okay, so
biggest mistake people
yeah,
make is getting that 2,500 square feet and trying to fill it. That I don't see that happening at all. And one of the things
wow,
I did note in Europe, the clubs are way smaller in these
okay,
other countries. They're smaller, and so I think you know, we knew when we were going to open up something, it had to be small because
hmm,
there wouldn't be any way in the world to fill up, anything bigger than we have. And quite
right.
frankly, I mean, unless and until you can prove that you can put, 200 people in seats, I wouldn't suggest that anybody invest in anything that's too big
And
for
of course, it
jazz.
depends on the talent too. Of course, if you have a bigger name, you're more likely to fill out even a small spot. I think
Mhm,
having a name that's been around
mhm.
helps.
Oh yeah, but you'd have to have two shows to pay them because you're not going to get enough people. You're not going to get enough people in that first show to pay these
Yeah,
artists that you're talking about because
mhm,
nowadays you have to pay for travel, you got
yeah,
to pay for the rooms,
yeah,
and then you got to pay for the talent. Now, if you're talking about, let's say that's times four, yeah, no,
yeah.
that's great. That's difficult.
So let's talk about speaking of venues. The venue that when I first moved to Tallahassee, I was looking for a jazz spot, and I couldn't find any. And I believe a great friend of mine said, "Hey, did you check out B Sharps?" I'm like, "No, I never heard of B Sharps," which is in a historic neighborhood. And so the first time I drove there, I'm like, it don't look like no clubs in this area. I'm like, kept looking at my GPS. I'm like, is this the right spot? It's a house.
Uh-huh.
But
Yeah.
but it was unique, and so once I was able to get in there, I like immediately just it the talent. Of course, I met you and your husband, who was so gracious and welcoming. And so, talk about when you first decided to open up. Well, first of all, to give a history of that particular house, and then how you transcend that house into a jazz venue.
Okay. So, I came here to work at FAM in 97. Yeah, 97. And there weren't any jazz clubs here. Mm. And all the music was just mostly, geared toward the college kids. And that's fine. But there weren't any jazz clubs. So I was like, oh boy, this is going to be a long haul in Tallahassee with no music. So after about 3 or 4 years, I decided I wanted to open my own club. And so I started just looking for space. I knew it had to be small and it had to be
Right,
something I could afford. So um, one of the gentlemen who lives here, I'd been helping writing some business plans or whatever. And he
mm-hmm.
happened to own these buildings. And so he was going to sell one of them. And I said, well, can I take a look at it? I said, I was like, oh, Lord. So I went on down there. And it was really hot outside. You know how it is in Tallahassee.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
when I walked in the building, it was so cool. I was like, how is that possible? And but most importantly, the acoustics were so incredible. I was like,
Yes.
oh my God, and I just got chills because I knew I wanted to have an acoustic room because that amplification just messes up the whole sound. And
Mm-hmm.
that would be it was the room that was important, the sound that attracted me mostly.
Right.
And then I
Yeah.
found out it was on the local register of historic places. And coming from Virginia, where everything's historic, I
Yes.
thought, well, maybe I can pull this on back online. And I was able to get a small grant from the city. They have a historic preservation thing. And then, after several other loans and whatnot, we got enough money to fix that up and get it on the national register. So, come to find out, it was a building built in 1921 that was funded by a group of women calling themselves the Women's Working Band. And the Women's Working Band was a national organization out of the Baptist Missionary Church. So they were all around the country. And these women would work to do things in their community.
Yeah.
So this was a time, again, of a lot of women's clubs, including the Women's Christian Temperance Union.
Okay.
Now, the owner and director of the Women's Christian Temperance Union uses the word woman with an apostrophe S because she felt as if you used women, the plural, nobody could be held accountable because you just said women in general.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if you say woman, woman's, then each woman is accountable.
Wow.
For whatever it is you're working on. And so this organization, the Women's Working Band, took that same trope up and put that apostrophe S on woman's, so that when it was time to say, we're going to do something about this, that, or the other, each woman in that club was responsible for helping getting that done. So the Women's Working Band, the notion of a group of women banding together, that's kind of a church term.
Yeah.
So that's where that came from. So we felt really, really positive about that. Then we came across one of the deeds because they had built this building in 21 as an old folks home. And then during the Depression, they opened it up as a daycare center for the people who were on the Works Progress Administration. And then during World War II, they actually donated the building to the returning vets so they could have an American Legion post, because the white post is across the city over, not too far. But this was the black post, because we're still talking about 1948 or so. Is when the guys took it over. And in that deed, these women wrote that whoever owned the building needed to make sure they did something for the community, whoever bought it after or in perpetuity, whatever. And we were like, wow, that's deep. And then they had all their names on there and everybody had signed it. It's really a pretty cool document. So that's kind of how we end up with that building. It has just enough seats and the sound, it makes all the difference.
Yeah. And then what year did you guys took over that particular building?
Okay, so we bought it in 2004. Took us about 4 years to get it restored. We opened up in 2008, January of 2008. And then it was placed on the National Register in 2010. So we've been in there a good little while now.
Yeah. And so, and then you made it a jazz venue. And I noticed also when I started to come by, you will have students come over and play as that was part of the community togetherness of community building. That's something that you offer the community, or just the school in itself?
Well, either school, FAMU or FSU, they both have those music departments. And FSU has been very, very supportive of us. They loaned us a piano, because we had my little piano from when I was little. But they sent in a Steinway. I was like, oh my God. And then their kids, they have a piano technology course, graduate students, and they would keep it tuned. So FSU has been very, very supportive.
Wow.
We had that piano about 10 years, I guess. We finally got enough money to get our own, but that made all the difference. When you're bringing in people like, I
was going to ask you that.
Cyrus Chestnut, you got to have a piano.
Yeah. Seriously.
Okay. So that made a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
A lot of people, when Wallace came through, we brought all the group in. And that's when I was using my piano that I had when I was a kid, right? So we brought that in because that's all we had at the time. He came when we first opened almost.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as his kid sat down, this is a kid from Cuba. He was the piano player was from Cuba. The first thing they did was take the front and the back off. I was like, wait, what? Wait. What y'all doing to my piano? And they took it all apart, took the top off, and did something else. And I was like, oh, geez, how's this going to work? But they made it work. They made it work.
Wow.
And that was one of the biggest people we had at the beginning. The thing that
Right.
that first day, when we first started, we'd have a police officer in there. I don't know, with just well, with Wallace and people like that, I just wanted to make sure we're all straight.
Right.
Well, I'll be damned if somebody was flying a plane and the plane crashed on Tennessee Street, a little plane, and that knocked out all the electricity for the whole neighborhood, everybody.
Oh, no.
So Wallace and those guys were just a plane. Da, 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 and all of a sudden the lights went out. I'm thinking to myself, damn, I paid the bill. I know I paid the bill. Clarence, did you pay the bill? Yes, I paid the bill. Well, come to find out, the police officer told us what had happened. But the funniest thing was Wallace and those guys never stopped playing. They just kept going like nothing happened. They just kept going. I'm like, oh, they just kept right on going as if nothing in the world happened. And they finished the set. And the police officer helped everybody get to their cars. But that was one, that was, oh, brother. Those are the things that drive you crazy. You can't predict what's going to happen.
You
just have
can't.
to kind of roll with it. Yeah.
That's right. So talk about Wallace. What about some other musicians that came through? Some most notables musicians that came through.
So Jason Marcellus comes through. He comes through a lot.
That's big. That's huge.
Back in the day, when we lived in Richmond, Jason's dad was teaching at VCU, and Clarence was teaching at VCU. So we've known Jason since he's like 10, maybe 12, maybe. We've known him practically all his life. So that it was really cool to have that kind of full circle, to have him come over and play. Yeah, he's cool. No, sometimes he'll bring his group, and sometimes he'll just come by himself. But he's cool. And then Cyrus came through, and a lot of these guys Clarence played with, so these aren't like strangers.
Right, of course.
We just called the folks we know. So we had Steve Wilson come through. I did like an Adderley thing one year, and it's like a little festival, mini festival. So we started it out at the graveyard, right, where the Adderleys are buried. And Steve Wilson was here, Scotty was here, a lot of cats were here. And then the students came out. We had like this huge jam session out at the cemetery. That was cool. Yeah.
Wow.
That was cool.
Awesome.
I want to do that again. And then sometimes when Winton stops through, if he's playing around, he'll come over and the guys will come over. Same with Scotty's group, Scotty Barnhart, Count Basie guys, they'll come over. We started having those big shows like that. We'll have an after hang, and then folks will come over there after that because those guys, they don't want to stop playing. So
they can play
and
for all night if you let them.
I know, right? At one time we had an after hang. Freddie Cole, they must have been here for something at Cascades Park. And Freddie Cole was here, and he came over, and Marcus was in town. So that was a really cool evening because he got up and sang, and Marcus played. It was really cool. Now, so sometimes when we do those after hangs, somebody might miss the original show, but they'll be there by the time we get from the show to the club. We got a line if we're not already sold out, because see that's where the real happens. After the
show. And I do recognize how important, because I met some community residents in Tallahassee. Talk about the importance of community support for B Sharps in that neighborhood.
Well, the thing is, and it's taken me a minute. Well, we want to work on that, but we have to have tickets at $20, $25, $30 sometimes.
Oh yeah.
Depending on who's there, because I have to pay them. they might come, but they ain't coming for free.
No, they're not.
And I wouldn't ask them to do that. But
right.
So sometimes those tickets can be like we had Dr. John come one time.
That's right.
That
You
was
did tell me
fun.
that.
That was way fun. Anyway, I could get two sets out of that. This town didn't understand about sets,
Hmm.
so it was hard, and it is hard to have people come like for the 7 o'clock set, and then they got to leave, and
Yeah.
then the next they don't like that here. They want to stay the whole
Mm.
time.
For the whole
So I had
time. Yeah.
so I had to change my pricing
Hmm.
because I'm dependent on two sets to pay these people.
Right.
So I didn't have any trouble getting two sets out of the Dr. John night. That was they understood that. That was cool. But at any rate, I forget what the question was. What was it?
No, just asking, the importance of B
Oh yeah.
sharps to the community, especially in Frenchtown.
So the people who live in that neighborhood, they just released these numbers this week, and
Hmm.
it's only gotten worse. But we're in the zip code 32304, and that's the poorest zip code in the state.
Wow. Wow. I didn't know that.
In the state, and they released some new data. It's called the Alice Report, and
Hmm.
they go about through the zip codes, and 84% of the people in 32304 are at poverty or below.
Hmm.
84%. So they can't afford this.
Right.
So the people who come to this probably live out in Collard somewhere out that way or somewhere in these other neighborhoods. But they can't afford that. The local people can't afford it. And so that's one of the reasons that we're trying to put together what we're calling the Frenchtown Youth Orchestra.
Wow. Okay.
So we're entering into new construction. It's going to be new buildings in the back of the building.
Okay.
And what we're going to try to do is get the children into some music lessons so that when they get to a certain point, we have a space that'll be performance space,
Hmm.
and it
Hmm.
opens up out into a little like courtyard, and the parents and the people in the community can bring their lawn chairs, and the children can
Wow.
play, and
I
then
love that.
they have an opportunity. And then I'll probably, get other people in too who are willing to volunteer or whatever. But they'll have an opportunity to come and hear the music too, because it
That's
doesn't
awesome.
make sense to have something like this in the middle of a community that can't afford it. That's crazy.
That's right. That's right.
So that's what we're trying to do. We're going to also have like a little coffee shop. And we're going to name what's called the Redbird Cafe. Apparently, that was the big place to go during the Chitlin circuit, right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they tore it down naturally. It was around the corner over on Macomb somewhere, but they tore it down. And so we were able to get this grant, African American History and Culture grant, that the Biden people put out. And that
Mm.
grant is supposed to help underserved neighborhoods um, repair their historic spaces and to recreate spaces that were important at one time but got torn down. So that's what we're doing, working on that. Hopefully, we'll have access to the new construction by Christmas. I'm hoping.
Yeah.
Oof. Well, we were able to do a lot of repair work on the historic property. We're almost done with that, and then we'll start the new construction in the back.
That sounds good. That's awesome, Dr. Gerri. I didn't realize what you guys was up to. The reason why you close it. This is my first time hearing the reasoning or the reconstruction of B Sharps and what you're trying to accomplish. And I think that is